Warning, the show you are about to watch is very, very naughty. They talk about scary movies and frightening stuff and other really inappropriate things, and it's only appropriate for people over the age of 18, and frankly, even they shouldn't watch it, and if you keep watching, I wash my hands of the whole thing.
They say time changes everything, and movies are no exception. Tonight, we're going to see just how much time can change things as we look at a couple of teen slasher films from two very different eras. It's all coming up on this episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Hello and welcome to another new episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, PBDCtv's place for a fun discussion of horror movies. I'm your host, Steve the Cat. Now, as you heard last week, we've got a new mission here at Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. In addition to hosting a fun discussion about horror movies, we're also helping out with a scientific task force called Project Brevity. Project Brevity scans deep space for broadcast signals, particularly those from old VHS-era horror movies, and we help them to analyze them and interpret the data. So last week, the project leader sent us a batch of signals to decrypt, and tonight we're going to talk about this one right here. So I'm going to kick off a quick video conference with our resident monster expert, Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus, who's been working with Ravina the intern to interpret this image. So, Edgar, what can you tell us about this signal?
Greetings to you all. I am Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus, expert in monsterology and kaiju studies. This particular image has proven to be quite difficult to interpret. As it turns out, the research material most relevant to this image cannot be found in our library. So, as you can see, I have been forced to go on the road to perform my research.
Wait a minute, Edgar, are you at the mall?
We are at a mall lingerie shop called Madame Pussycat's House of Silk. He's been dragging me here all week. He's making the other customers very uncomfortable, and the mall cops have already chased him out of the store 3 times this week. It is all very embarrassing.
Edgar, I'm sure I'm going to regret asking this, but why are you creeping on ladies at the mall?
I am performing valuable research. The decryption of this image has required extensive information about women's sleepwear and undergarments that I cannot access from the office.
Ah, I see. So the porn blocker got you.
Yes, the list of sites it has blocked is quite comprehensive. Fortunately, I have been able to decrypt the image, and I've just uploaded a detailed analysis to our server. And now I must go. The food court has an Arby's and I need my big beef and cheddar.
Well, his methods may be a little odd, but it looks like Edgar has figured this one out. It's an image from a great old classic. So this gives us a chance to talk about something old, something new, and how teenage slasher films have changed over the last 40 years. Anyway, thank you once again for joining us. Now make yourself comfortable and sit back, because here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat and Project Brevity are very pleased to bring you the debut of a brand new music video from Malcolm Fluffosaurus, or as he is known on stage, DJ DynoFluff. Actually, we're not proud to debut this at all, but I've had to listen to it for the last 2 weeks, so now you're going to listen to it. Anyway, we hope you enjoy this. Or don't. I really don't care. You listen, I'm going to go dig into the liquor cabinet now.
Yeah, this is a story about the 5th labor of Hercules. Here we go. Rolling down the street in my Volvo sedan, cause you know I am a player, but I gotta stay safe. When I roll up on a place that they call OG and Stables, and I stop and I say, ladies, it's hero time. Well, you know my name is Hercules, I'm here to save the day. So just take me to your monster, cause you know I'm gonna slay. And the ladies, they all swoon. But then an old man steps out and he hands me a shovel and he says, son, follow me. So he takes me to a stable and you know it smells so bad. Full of poo, full of poo. It's a stable full of poo. There was ox poo, goat poo, sheep poo, cow poo, every kind of poo. And the man says, son, you've got just one day to clean out all that poo. And I said, oh man. So what could I do? I didn't want to shovel poo. So I go behind the stable and I dig. And I dig and I dig and I dig and dig, and soon I dug a long trench all the way to the riverbank. And I said, ladies, it's time to make it rain. So I break on through when the river pours in and a big wall of water rolls down. And it sweeps through the stable and it washes out the poo. And the oxes and the goats and the sheep and the cows. Clearly I did not think this through, because those cows never knew what hit them. Rest in peace, cows. So I jump back in my Volvo and I bounce out of town, because some things you just can't talk your way out of. Yeah.
And now it's time for our featured film reviews.
Let's get into our VHS classic for this evening. We are going to talk about this beauty right here. Yes, the Slumber Party Massacre. This is a slasher splatter film that was released in the year 1982. Directed by Amy Holden Jones. Yes, a film called The Slumber Party Massacre, which is obviously a teen exploitation film, was directed by a woman. Frankly, I was shocked to find that out myself. And the cast includes Michelle Michaels, Robin Still, and Michael Villela. So let's talk about setting your expectations for this film. What you should expect is an iconic, cheesy, naughty splatter film from the glory days of the VHS era. This is one of those that you need to check off of your horror fan bucket list. Every horror fan needs to have seen this film at least once. If you like Friday the 13th, you might like this movie. This movie is of the Friday the 13th variety, more so than the Halloween variety. It's a little less suspense and more just straight up a guy running around and killing people. So let's get into calibrating your expectations. This is the scale we like to use. On the far left side of the scale, we have very campy movies, such as Jason X. On the far right side of the scale, we have very serious movies, such as The Silence of the Lambs. Understand that this scale is not an assessment of the quality of the film. This is an assessment of the mindset you need going into the film in order to maximize your enjoyment of it. This film is pretty much right down the middle. This film does not take itself particularly seriously, but on the other hand, it's not really campy. They don't have a lot of campiness and jokes baked into it. They're pretty much playing it straight, but at the same time, it's a exploitation film. They're not taking it that seriously, so it's one of those just kind of check your mind at the door and have fun splatterfests from the early 80s. So before we go any farther, we need to get into a vocabulary lesson. This, of course, is the part of the show where we discuss new and innovative words and phrases in an effort to stay ahead of social media bots and algorithms that would otherwise try to ban our conversation. We're going to have two words for this film. Word number one is bosom augering. Going back to the first episode of last season, bosom augering is a noun referring to the action of drilling or boring a hole in the abdomen, thorax, or sternum of a character. And yes, it's redundant to say abdomen and thorax and sternum, but it just sounds more scientifical that way, so we're going to go with it. Second word is noggin augering. Noggin augering is a noun that refers to the action of drilling or boring a hole in a character's noggin. It's very similar to bosom augering, but typically noggin augering requires either a stationary victim or much better aim. So that's our vocabulary lesson. Please keep these terms in mind. They will become important later in the episode. So let's get into a film summary. This is one of those films where the title kind of tells you everything you need to know, but we'll go into a film summary anyway. 18-year-old high school senior Trish is having a slumber party while her parents are away, and they make it a point to have her say she is 18 years old, I assume to make you feel better about the fact that you were going to be looking at her topless throughout the film. She invites new girl Valerie, who lives next door, but Valerie declines. There's a little bit of drama at school between Valerie and some of Trish's friends. Valerie's the new girl. She's still kind of the outsider. She's not been accepted. Trish is trying to extend the olive branch, but Valerie declines the party invitation. Instead, she stays home to babysit her younger sister because her parents are also out for the evening. So your typical slumber party antics ensue, including showers, including wardrobe changes, and, of course, including boys spying upon the girls during the wardrobe changing. Just your harmless, innocent fun. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, did I mention the escaped serial killer who is on the loose? Yeah, that's an important part of this film. Let's talk about that a little bit. So our villain for the film looks like this. Yeah, kind of creepy guy with a drill. His name is Russ Thorne. He is of the slasher serial killer class. Doesn't really have any special powers other than the fact that he is stealthy, but otherwise he's a regular guy, so he's not super powered like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers. Just a regular guy who's very, very stealthy. And his signature weapon, as you see in these pictures, is a big freaking cordless power drill. Now, it is not the only weapon he uses, but it is his preferred weapon, and he uses it for the majority of the kills in this film. So let's get into the things I liked about this movie. Now, going in, you need to understand that this is a cheesy 80s exploitation splatter film. If you are okay with that, it's pretty fun. The story moves at a reasonable pace, and there are very few places where the film actually drags, so the story keeps itself moving along. The pacing is actually pretty good for a low-budget exploitation film. The pacing is actually pretty sound. There are decent practical special effects considering the budget and the era in which it was made. Now, this film came out the same year as John Carpenter's The Thing. The practical special effects in this film do not hold a candle to the practical special effects from The Thing, but they were not comparable films in terms of budgets either. Slumber Party Massacre, while it's nothing to write home about, it's not terrible either. So all things considered, considering that this film came out in 1982 and was probably made for $27, not bad practical special effects. There are some decent jump scares and kills in the film. And did I mention there's a long locker room shower scene? Yes, there is. So that alone kind of makes the movie worth watching. Now let's talk about some of the things that could have been better with this film. So once again, right off the bat, this is a cheesy 80s exploitation splatter film. If you are not okay with that, you will be horrified. You will be horrified by the exploitation. You will be horrified by the nudity. You will be horrified by the voyeurism. You will be horrified by the violence. If you cannot just strap in and hold on and enjoy the ride for a cheesy splatterfest exploitation film from the 80s, this is not the film for you. So just give this one a pass. Don't watch. Just treat this as, I don't get the joke, it wasn't intended for me, and just watch something else. Frankly, there's not a whole lot to the story. Girls throw a slumber party, and a killer shows up. In fact, if you look at the poster, the title of the poster kind of gives you an idea of how the movie works. You've got the slumber party in one font, and you've got massacre written in a different font. So it's almost like you have a slumber party, and then a massacre appended to it. And that's kind of how the movie works out. You have a slumber party, and then in the last third, it becomes a massacre. Now, that's not entirely true, because Russ Thorne is killing a person or two in town throughout the beginning of the film, so it does have some action in the beginning. But the majority of the action occurs, say, in the final third of the film. The characters are largely one-dimensional, and the girls seem interchangeable. That's pretty standard fare for this kind of film, but yeah, you're going to walk out of this not really knowing a whole lot about the personalities of one girl versus the other. Valerie's younger sister Courtney comes across as unlikable. Now, they're trying to play up the whole slightly bratty younger sister sibling rivalry between the younger sister and the older sister. They're always picking on each other, but they do really love each other. It's just, it's a typical sibling stuff where you disguise your affection with insults. I know that's what they're going for, but maybe it's just because they cast an actual young teen as Valerie's younger sister, and maybe she wasn't a great actress. It's just not pleasant to watch. She's just annoying. So let's get into Steve's scorecard for this film. Kills, 11. Bare breasts. There are 13 in all shapes and sizes. You have D cups, you have A cups, you have cup sizes in between, and it is an odd number because you get an extreme close-up of one getting felt up during a car makeout session. Denogginings, you get 1. Instumpanatings, again, you get 1. Bosom augerings, you get 2. Noggin augerings, you get 5. Now, I'm counting augerings through the neck as noggin augerings here. I wasn't really sure how to score those. You have several people that get the drill bit through the neck. So I decided to count those as noggin augerings. And let me tell you, the denoggining that happens in this film happens off camera. So I'm not exactly sure how it happened. I am assuming he was denoggined using the power drill, so I have counted that as a noggin augering, but I could be wrong. Indeterminate off-screen augerings, 1. What do I mean by that? Well, in order to make the special effects budget work, they really didn't have a good way to show Russ Thorne stabbing people with the power drill. So for all the stabbings, they kind of show a camera point of view shot from the victim's perspective, Russ Thorne standing above them, plunging down with the power drill, and then blood spattering, but you never actually see the drill bit hit the victim because it's being shot from the victim's point of view. That was done because, frankly, they did not know how to make the special effects work with driving that long auger-style drill bit into a victim. So you don't actually see a lot of the augerings. You see the victim afterwards in many cases, so it kind of made scoring this film difficult for me because I had to go back and keep track of, okay, that kill was a noggin augering and so on. But there is at least one where you never find out what happened to her. You know he's killed somebody, but in the course of the film they never find the body, so you don't know exactly where he got her. You assume in the head, but you don't know. Now, with a movie like this, you would expect a lot of bonus features. You would not be wrong. To start, you get exposition by radio and newspaper, and you get it by radio twice, so they really want to make sure that you know that a serial killer has escaped and is on the loose. It is covered twice in radio exposition, and it's also on the cover of the newspaper, and yet these girls are completely oblivious to it. You get a soundtrack by Mr. Mittens the Cat walking across a synthesizer. Yeah, I think they paid the neighborhood kid $5 to peck away on his Casio keyboard in the garage and do the soundtrack for this movie because it's not particularly impressive. You get short shorts aplenty. Yes, this was the golden age of short shorts, and the girls are wearing them. You get jiggly women's basketball. I don't know if sports bras existed in 1982, but if they did, these girls had not heard of them because you get some pretty jiggly women's basketball in the early stages of this film. And of course, where you have jiggly women's basketball, you have a post-basketball locker room shower action scene. Yes, and that goes on for a while. So it is every teenage boy's fantasy. You get a lengthy stay inside the girls' locker room during shower time. Yes, you feel kind of bad about it in this day and age. You get peeping Tomming, so in addition to the locker room scene, you have the boys outside the window watching the girls change, getting ready for the slumber party. But you also have teen girls reading porn. Yes, Valerie's little sister Courtney is reading porn, so it's like everybody has their kink in this film. You get snail killing action. Trish's next door neighbor on the other side has a problem with snails in his garden, but he refuses to use pesticides. So what does he do? He waits until dark when the snails come out, then he goes around with a machete whacking them all. It's more than a little bit creepy. You get Barbie doll mangling. You get blonde girl in the fridge. I guess I should specify that is a dead blonde girl in the fridge. You get drill versus fireplace poker. Yes, in the final battle of the film, you are treated to Russ Thorne with his giant drill versus the basketball coach with a fireplace poker. But that is not all. In addition to drill versus fireplace poker, you also get drill versus machete. After the resolution of drill versus fireplace poker, you get Russ Thorne with his drill taking on Valerie with a machete. So you have all of that to look forward to as bonus features in your viewing of the Slumber Party Massacre. So what's Steve's final score for this film? We're going to give it 2.5 paws out of 4. We're going to call this a reasonably entertaining 80s era splatter film. Largely unoriginal and predictable, but it does keep the action moving, and it manages to not take itself too seriously while avoiding outright campiness. So this finds the good sweet spot between making a gritty movie, which they did not want to do. They wanted to make a movie that you could just kind of strap in and have fun with it, but at the same time they didn't make it campy. It's not silly, it's not ridiculous, there's not a lot of built-in jokes and winking at the camera. So they found the sweet spot between that, at least in my opinion. So 2.5 paws out of 4, and that is Steve's review of the Slumber Party Massacre.
And now a word from our benevolent overlords at PBDCtv, your nightly heartbeat of horror.
This is Mikey from Out of the Ordinary, and you're watching PBDCtv.
Oh, hi! First thing in the morning, when I'm listening to music and getting a little bit of time for some creepy research, I'm always representing with my PBDC merch. What a better way to have a cup of coffee in the morning.
Don't forget to check out our other cool merch at rootsbleedred.com. That's rootsbleedred.com.
This is Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus from Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and when I'm not hosting Monster Chat or knocking down small Japanese cities, I'm watching PBDCtv. Now back to the show.
So in our first featured film review, we talked about something old, so I thought to draw a contrast to that, in our second featured film review, we would talk about something new. So we're going to talk about this new film from Netflix, There's Someone Inside Your House. This is a Netflix exclusive teen slasher film that was released this year in the year 2021. It was directed by Patrick Bryce, and the cast includes Sidney Park, Theodore Pellerin, and an ensemble of others. And I apologize if I mispronounced Pellerin. I do look for pronunciation guides online for these names, but sometimes you can find them and sometimes you can't. So let's get into setting your expectations for this film. What you should expect is an exercise in marketing consultant input and check all the boxes casting disguised as a teen slasher film. Yes, right off the bat, you get the impression I did not care for this film. This film is a lot like Scream and kind of like Fear Street Trilogy. If you like either of those, you will probably like There's Someone Inside Your House. Let's get into setting your expectations, and as far as the scale we use, on the far left side of the scale we place very campy films such as Jason X. On the far right side of the scale we place very serious films such as The Silence of the Lambs. As always, this scale is not an assessment of the quality of the movie. The scale is an assessment of what mindset you need going into the movie in order to enjoy it. You know, don't go in expecting a campy movie if it's serious. Don't go in expecting a serious movie if it's campy, and so on. This film is straight down the middle. It's pretty vanilla. It is straight down the middle. It is not played for laughs. On the other hand, it's a slasher flick, so you can't take it that seriously. So before we go any farther, let's get into our vocabulary lesson for this film. Now, this is the part of the review where we discuss new and innovative words and phrases in an effort to stay ahead of social media bots and algorithms that would otherwise try to ban our conversation. We've got another 2 vocabulary words, one of which is brand new for this lesson. We're going to start with Trojan warring. Trojan warring is a noun referring to the action of running a cutting or slicing implement across a character's Achilles tendon, thus bringing him toppling to the ground like a drunken frat boy. It's pretty painful to watch. Our second word is Pez dispensering, which you have heard us use a number of times in the past. Pez dispensering, for those of you who are new, is a noun that refers to the action of pulling a character's head backwards and then running a sharp object across the character's now exposed esophagus. Yeah, if you know anything about Pez dispensers, you kind of get that one. Anyway, keep these words in mind. They will become important later in the episode. So let's get into a film summary. In this film, Makani is the new girl in school. She has a dark secret in her past. That seems to be the case all the time. The protagonist in these films has a dark secret in her past or his past. Makani has a diverse group of friends who look like they came straight out of Arlington, Virginia, which is odd since the movie takes place in rural Nebraska. It is a very diverse group of friends, covering the full spectrum of ethnic identities and gender identities and sexual orientations. Would be perfectly at home in Arlington, Virginia. Might be a bit of a stretch for rural Nebraska, but I don't know, maybe times have changed there as well. Anyway, her friends have dark secrets too. One night, somebody murders one of the football players and exposes his dark secret. So the football player is murdered, and immediately afterwards a text message goes out to everyone in the world with a video of him doing something horrible and exposing his dark secret posthumously. The killer then moves on to other students, killing them one by one, and in each case exposing their dark secrets. Can the intrepid teens solve the case and stop the murderer? So, pretty standard fare. It's basically Scream. We mentioned a murderer here. Let's talk about that murderer. So, here's a picture of the murderer. Now, this film is a whodunit, and I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, so I'm not going to tell you whodunit. We are just going to refer to the killer as the Masked Killer. The Masked Killer is a slasher serial killer, a very conventional slasher serial killer. His or her special powers are stealth and proficiency with technology, and his or her signature weapon is a long drop-point hunting knife with a fuller, plus a mask made to look exactly like the victim's face. So when the masked killer sets out, he or she only has one particular target in mind, and he or she is wearing a mask to look like the victim. So if the masked killer comes across somebody on the masked killer's list, but who's not up that night, and the masked killer is not wearing the mask that corresponds to that person, he or she lets that person live. So a very organized serial killer. So let's talk about the things Steve liked about this film. Now, right off the bat, the film has excellent production values. Visually, it looks great on screen. This does not look like a cheap film. This looks like a very competently produced film. James Wan is one of the producers of this film. There's a lot of lovely cinematography of the Nebraska cornfields and such, so the film looks great. Many of the kills are very intense, and the special effects that are used in the kills are very good, despite the use of some CGI, so there is definitely some computer-generated blood spatter in these, but they do a pretty good job of it, and frankly, the kills in this movie are, in my opinion, the best part. The opening sequence is particularly well done. It's very reminiscent of the opening of Scream, where Drew Barrymore is killed by Ghostface. In this movie, you have the football player being killed by the masked killer. Very similar scene, very well done, very intense killing. It really sucked me into the movie, making me think that I was really going to enjoy this movie. Unfortunately, that was about it for things I liked about this film. Let's talk about things that could have been better. Well, the story is incredibly derivative and predictable. Like I said, it's basically Scream. But stacked on top of that, there are some long stretches where very little happens. So you've got very little action in some long stretches of the film. There's not that many kills in this film, so it gets kind of dull here and there. The ensemble cast of the film feels like a diversity box-checking exercise, which makes the film even more predictable. So to talk about that for a moment, so it's become commonplace on Broadway and in plays, for example, to kind of not pay attention to somebody's ethnic identity when you're casting them in a part, and thus you can end up with, say, African Americans playing the parts of one of the founding fathers back in the days of the American Revolution and so on. And that's kind of a good and necessary thing, because otherwise certain people are being locked out of appearing in any story that takes place prior to, say, the 1960s. And that is a concept that is starting to make its way into movies and television. On Netflix, there is a fantasy series called Cursed, which is a fantasy retelling of the legend of King Arthur. And the character playing Arthur is African American, which, probably would not have been historically accurate for Britain at the time. But it's a fantasy series, so there's all kinds of other unreality in it anyway, so they introduced a more diverse cast. Again, no problem with that. It does, unfortunately, however, lead to one predictability problem in this particular film, because although the film is supposed to be a whodunit, the casting makes it easy to identify the killer simply through the process of elimination. Now, I'm going to say something that may get me in trouble here, but if you look at the cast of characters and run your way down the hierarchy of wokeness and say, well, the killer can't be this person because that would be offensive. The killer can't be that person because it would be offensive. The killer can't be that person because it would be offensive. By the time you get down to who's left, there's literally only two people left. And it's not too hard to figure out who the killer is. And on top of that, despite a monologue worthy of a James Bond villain, the killer's motivation does not really make a lot of sense. Now, granted, by the end of the movie, I had kind of lost interest and was just, at that point, it was all sunk cost fallacy, and I was just trying to finish the film. But the villain's motivation and monologue explaining his motivation did not seem to match up to the amount of trouble that the killer went through in the movie. It just didn't mesh up. It didn't make a lot of sense. And finally, there's only so much teenage drama a grown-ass adult can stomach. This film, I'm just going to say this film was not for me. So let's get to Steve's scorecard. Kills, I counted 6. Bare breasts, None. Oh my, how teen slasher films have changed. Compare this to Slumber Party Massacre. Turkey timers. Well, you do at least get a couple of turkey timers. Possumings. None. Nobody gets hit with a car in this film. Denoggenings. None. Infuegoinatings. You kind of have one. You have somebody pushed into a bonfire in this film. Pez dispenserings. You have one. And Trojan warrings. Again, you have one. So you have one character taken down by the Achilles tendons. That is not a particularly exciting scorecard. Like I said, this movie, I'm going to guess, is more for teens. Now, with your viewing of There's Someone Inside Your House, you do get some bonus features, such as corn, and more corn. Yes, it is corn a go-go in this film. You get a sleepwalking grandma, which, honestly, I thought was going to turn into a plot point somewhere in the film, but unless I had lost interest and missed it, it didn't. It was just a thing. You get a heroine who lives on Prescott Street. Yes, a throwback to the name Sidney Prescott, the protagonist from all the Scream films. You get fully clothed canoodling action. Yes, the marketing consultant said we do need to have some sex in this film, but we don't want to have any nudity because that's exploitation. So you have some fully clothed canoodling in this film. You have fentanyl addiction because the marketing consultants who helped put the script together said we need to talk about that because that's an important social issue. So naturally, a character in the film is a fentanyl addict. You have racist podcasts. One of the killer's victims is an awful person who has an underground racist podcast, which, again, the marketing consultants said we have to put that into the film because that's another important issue. You have an anti-cigarette teen who cannot stop smoking pot. Yes, the teens are constantly smoking pot throughout this film, yet whenever one of them blazes up a cigarette, the other snatches it out of his mouth and throws it away and says, "Who even smokes anymore?" I don't talk about my day job a whole lot, folks, but I literally have an advanced degree in engineering, and I literally specialized in setting things on fire. And let me tell you something, if you think marijuana smoke is any better for your lungs than cigarette smoke, I have a bridge to sell you. If you can see smoke, that's because there's particulates for the light to bounce off of, and if you're inhaling it, that stuff's getting stuck in your lungs. Now, marijuana smokers are better off because they're not going through one after another, like people who smoke 2 packs a day. But debating whether pot smoke is better for you than cigarette smoke is kind of like debating which variety of cyanide is lower in trans fat. You have military memorabilia converted into marijuana pipes and bongs. And understand when I say military memorabilia, I am referring to military memorabilia from a particular socialist party who had some sway in Europe in the early part of the 20th century, and whom I cannot mention by name without getting demonetized and or banned from social media. You get a taser-toting serial killer. Now, I kind of have a problem with this, having grown up in the era of Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers. Not crazy about, the knife-wielding serial killer also having a taser to immobilize his prey ahead of time. It just strikes me as ridiculously unfair. You're already armed and going after an unarmed teenager. It seems doubly unfair. I'm not crazy about it. You have corn maze action. So many horror movies, slasher movies in particular, have a corn maze. I guess it's a good environment to have people get separated from each other and have the killer able to hide and pop out, but it just becomes a cliche after a while. Seriously, nobody just noticed that guy entering the corn maze with a sword? Yes, going into the end of the movie, the masked killer calmly walks right into the corn maze with a mask on and a hoodie and a sword strapped across his back, and nobody seems to notice or care. And finally, you get Welcome to Nebraska Corn Country. There's not a firearm in sight. So another of the input from the marketing consultants, no guns appear anywhere in this film, despite the fact that it takes place in rural Nebraska, and most of these kids would have learned how to shoot when they were 9. So let's get to Steve's final score for this movie. This movie was not for me. I only gave it 1 paw out of 4. I'm going to say it starts out strong but quickly gives way to disappointment. The intense kill scenes cannot compensate for the predictability, lack of action, and artificiality of the story. It might be okay for teens, Understand, I grew up watching the original Halloween and original Friday the 13th. I think this film is targeted more at teens for whom the original Iron Man is considered an old movie. So maybe the derivativeness of it is not going to bother them so much because they've never watched any of those old movies anyway, so they're going to think this is all shiny and new. If you're a veteran horror fan, not a whole lot going for it in this film. It's not terrible, but I'm not really interested in ever watching it again. So, 1 paw out of 4, and that is Steve's final score for There's Someone Inside Your House. Well, we're almost to the end of this episode, but before we go, it's time to talk about some other stuff we watched this week. Now, as we've been doing for the past few episodes, we're going to go around the horn this time. So, this is Steve the Cat. We're going to start with me. And this week, I watched an old classic called Shockwaves. Now, interestingly, I had never seen this movie before. I had heard of it. I know a lot of people are really crazy about this one, and it's an old classic, but for whatever reason, I had just somehow managed to never see this film, so I did finally get to see it. So what is Shockwaves? Well, in Shockwaves, a charter boat carrying 4 tourists and 3 crew members of questionable competence goes through a series of events, sees some weird stuff, finally seems to collide with something in the dark and starts to take on water. The passengers and crew are forced to abandon ship. So the passengers and crew get in their little dinghy. They row ashore to take refuge on an island and find that it is populated by one, shall we say, ex-German socialist military officer played by Peter Cushing, Grand Moff Tarkin himself. And it turns out that the island is also home to a number of ex-German socialist soldier zombies who live under the water but can come out and attack at any time. Now, honestly, I found this film kind of dull. There's not a whole lot to it. It wasn't that exciting. I guess the makeup special effects are pretty interesting when you have these people in full-blown practical special effects walking around underwater, and it works well. So it looks halfway decent, but other than that, it's not really that compelling. It's not really that exciting. You think of zombie movies, you think of people being chased and eaten, and basically the zombies grab you and drown you in this film, so it's not even that scary. So worth watching if you like old classics, but not really worth going out of your way for. So that's what I watched this week. Now let's throw it over to Ravina.
Hello, this is Ravina the intern, here to talk about what I watched this week. This week I watched a supernatural horror film called Restoration. In this film, a young couple named Todd and Rebecca buy an old home that is in need of major renovation. As the couple renovates the house, they begin to find some disturbing items hidden inside the walls, such as teddy bears and a diary. These items belong to a young girl who lived in the house years before. By opening the diary, the couple free the little girl's ghost and she begins to haunt them. As time goes on, the haunting becomes more and more terrifying. This film is mediocre and predictable. It is not terrible, but it also is not very interesting. If you enjoy supernatural horror films, you might find it entertaining, although I would not go out of my way to see this film. And now, let's throw the microphone over to Carl.
Thank you, Ravina. So, everybody, this is Carl, the camera monkey. I am the head writer for this show, and this week I watched something called Don't Look Up. Now, this is a Netflix exclusive. Now, as we talk about from time to time on this show, these episodes are pre-recorded. So, for me, as I'm recording this just became available on Netflix a few days ago. Now, for you, it might have been out for at least a month by the time you see this episode, depending upon how long it is before we get around to premiering Season 3. But anyway, Don't Look Up, a big star-studded Netflix exclusive. In this movie, an astronomy professor, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and one of his PhD students, played by Jennifer Lawrence, discover a new comet. And they quickly determine that the comet is going to strike the Earth, and it's big. It's very big. It's going to be an extinction-level event. Yet they cannot get anyone in the government to take the issue seriously. Meryl Streep plays the president, and she's only interested in playing this up for politics. You know, how will this help us in the midterm elections? Her chief of staff, Jonah Hill, is much the same way, can't take it seriously. The whole thing is a satire that mocks the current state of political divisiveness, how you have people argue over everything. You eventually get into a situation where there are people who are denying that the comet is coming, despite the fact that there are photographs of it. And the title of the movie comes from the fact that eventually, as the comet gets close enough to Earth, you can literally look up in the sky at night and see it. And so it becomes, okay, you certainly can't deny it now, we can all see it. And so naturally the other side is the don't look up movement, denying the comet, denying that we need to do anything about it. So making fun of the current state of polarization in the United States, and that really got under my skin, because it would be easier to take this film seriously if so many of the stars of this film had not made so much effort in their lives to create exactly the divisive atmosphere that the film is mocking. I mean, my God. Look at Jennifer Lawrence's Twitter feed, look at Leonardo DiCaprio's public statements, look at Meryl Streep's public statements. These are not people who have come out and said, hey, we're all friends here, we need to all get along. These people have been just as divisive as anybody else. So I would say it was a predictable movie. It was decently entertaining, it's well made, but I nearly hurt myself rolling my eyes so hard at this film. So if you can stomach it, great. If you can view it just as entertainment, that's great. You might have trouble checking your brain at the door and separating the people appearing in the movie from their real lives outside, and that kind of makes the whole thing fall apart. But I'm Carl, and that's what I watched this week.
Well, that's all for this episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the show. Now, if you did enjoy the show, please take a moment to give us a like and a share. The biggest thing you can do to help us out is to share this video. Also, feel free to leave a comment about the films we discussed tonight, or maybe tell us about your personal favorite teenage slasher movie, whether old or new. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, then please take a moment to stop by and check us out on social media and hit that subscribe button. You can find Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. And yes, that's Tales spelled with an A-I-L-S. Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat is just one of the shows that you can find on the PBDCtv Broadcast Collective. If you are interested in horror, true crime, weird history, creepy stories, or unexplained events, then PBDCtv is sure to have something for you. You can find us online at PBDCtv.com, and you can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. We're going to be back again next week to talk about a couple of more horror movies, so we hope to see you again then. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you had fun. Everyone stay safe and have a great week. We'll see you again soon. Good night, everybody.